Okay, in the previous few videos, we've been taking a look at how well the U.S. yield curve has been doing at forecasting economic growth over the past 20 years. And we found that, generally speaking, the private sector curve has done a better job of forecasting GDP growth than has the public sector curve. So that finding, while interesting, is far from comprehensive, in part because we actually don't have data on swap rates prior to the 1990s. So what happens if you go back further in time? How well does a public sector curve do at forecasting future GDP growth over a much longer period of time? And the answer is complicated. But generally speaking, steep yield curves precede periods of strong economic growth, whereas flat or inverted yield curves precede periods of weaker economic growth. But that said, though, the yield curves occasionally send false signals. Generally speaking, the yield curve did a great job of forecasting economic growth between about 1997 and 1994, and it's done a pretty good job since 1999. But there was this window of about 5 years in the late 1990s, from 1994 to 1999, where the yield curve sent a false signal. After the Federal Reserve hiked rates from 3% to 6% in 1994, the yield curve flattened a great deal. And that flat yield curve sent a signal that the U.S. economy should have been experiencing a pretty sharp slowdown. Well, the U.S. economy did have a sort of mild slowdown in 1995 and 1996. But then, in defiance of the yield curve, economic growth picked up and remained very strong in 1997, 1998, 1999, and all the way through to the year 2000. So why is it that the yield curve failed as an indicator in that 5-year window of time? The answer may lie in the equity market. Even as the Federal Reserve created rather tight conditions in the fixed income market, the equity market essentially created its own very loose monetary conditions. Soaring stock prices had two impacts on the economy in the late 1990s. The first was a wealth effect. As a result of soaring stock prices, many consumers felt better off and went ahead and spent more money. The second impact was that it made it extremely lucrative for companies to do initial public offerings. And indeed, many companies came to market during the late 1990s, raising tremendous amount of cash that boosted business investment. Now, once again, we're faced with a very flat yield curve, but at the same time, we have a soaring equity market. If the equity market continues to soar, it could be that the economy defies this sort of prediction, if you will, of a slower economic growth coming from a flat yield curve as a result of a wealth effect where people feel better off because the stock market is going higher, and as a result of lucrative IPOs bringing in tremendous amounts of cash and fueling more business investment. So if the economy manages to defy the yield curve in the next few years, we have the equity market to thank. But that depends, of course, on the equity market continuing to go higher. I'm Eric Norland, Senior Economist at the CME Group in London.